Classification of crystalline solids. Crystalline solids can be classified on the basis of nature of intermolecular forces. So you remember we talked about that when intermolecular forces are greater than thermal energy forces, then it is solid. Okay, then we talked about within solid we have crystalline solid and amorphous solid. Now we are talking about within crystalline solids, what is the classification? And this classification is on the basis of nature of intermolecular forces. Earlier, the classification was on the basis of between crystalline and amorphous. The classification was based on the order of the particles, how they are arranged. Now, when you are talking about crystalline solids, how they are classified on the basis of nature of intermolecular forces. There are four types of crystalline solids: molecular solids, ionic solids, metallic solids, and covalent solids. As the name suggests, you can identify them almost every time very clearly if you understand molecular solids will have molecules, ionic solids will have ions, metallic solids metals, and covalent solids will those ones where all the atoms are bonded, means a network is formed like this. So if you can understand this, there is 50% done. Because covalent solid, all these covalent bond between the atoms or amongst the atoms, these are also termed as network solids. Why network solid? Because there is a network of covalent bonds amongst the particles. So only molecular solids will have molecules. Because these type of questions are very common. You need to remember when we are asked to identify molecular solids, these will have molecules. Then again, there will be three types of molecular solids we will be talking about. But ionic, metallic, and covalent solids, there is no further segregation, only in molecular solids. So first, we will talk about these. But before that, we need to understand the type of forces, van der Waals forces, a little bit about that. Okay? So in molecular solids, intermolecular forces of attraction and repulsion amongst interactive particles keep them intact. That is, molecules are constant particles of molecular solids. This is something I have already told. In molecular solids, there will be molecules. And these molecules, say this is one molecule, this is another molecule. These molecules will be held intact, held together by some force. Okay? So some of these forces will be attractive forces, some of these forces will be repulsive forces. Attractive forces, repulsive forces. The overall net force of these attractive and repulsive forces is known as van der Waals force. Means the sum of attractive and repulsive intermolecular forces is termed as van der Waals force. Types of van der Waals forces. How many types of, remember, van der Waals forces are related to molecular solids. Okay? Then we will, on the type of van der Waals forces, we will be talking about three types of molecular solids later on. These van der Waals forces can be London forces or dispersion forces, dipole dipole forces, dipole induced dipole forces. Now tell me how many of you can recall that we have done it in 11th standard. Can you recall it? We talked about London forces, dipole dipole forces, dipole induced dipole forces in 11th grade as well. Yes, good, Ashi. In which chapter? Yes, Dev, good. Okay, good, good. So we talked about it mostly in states of matter and also in chemical bonding, because this is actually, when we talk about forces, it is van der Waals force. So if you remember, I showed you a diagram, chlorine atom form the molecule, and if it is between two chlorine atoms, the bond, then this is covalent radius, and if it is between two molecules, that was van der Waals radius, their van der Waals force came into picture. So yes, correct. Good. So London forces are weakest forces which can be there due to disturbance in electron cloud, and that disturbance can be just due to vibration also. Okay, so when we, that this is the same thing we talked about in 11th grade. London forces are exhibited by non-polar molecules because of temporary correlated movement of electrons in interacting molecules. So suppose this is one molecule, this is another molecule. Initially it was balanced. Okay, so when I say this one is nucleus, this one is uh, mm, if you remember, when we talked about in chemical bonding, we talked about molecular orbital theory, and then this was combined nuclear. Okay, then this was balanced, but due to vibrations, say this shifts to towards left, then it will acquire some negative charge on the right hand side, some negative charge on the left, some positive charge on the left hand side, because due to vibrations, the electron cloud got disturbed. So vibrations, say vibrations is just an example. Okay? Vibrations disturb the electron cloud, due to which polarity got generated, and due to this, the nearby molecule also attained some charge. So initially, if we consider the atoms, okay, of the molecules, atom A, atom B, both are undisturbed. They are symmetrical. But due to vibrations, atom A or molecule A will be the correct word because we are talking about molecular forces, with instantaneous dipole, more electron density on the right hand side. So due to vibrations, electron density shifted towards right, the nucleus shifted towards left, and that's why atom B got induced dipole. Actually, atom A got disturbed, atom B induced dipole. But because this is just temporary and due to vibrations, this force is very weak. So this delta minus and delta plus will attract each other, negative and positive, but it will be very, very weak force. So London forces or dispersion forces are very weak. It can be in any direction. Electron cloud can go in left side, then also the same thing. In B, the dipole will be induced. Then dipole forces means both are dipoles. They are permanent dipoles. For example, HCl. So HCl already has some partial charge. Chlorine is electronegative. That's why partial charge on the right side. Hydrogen is electropositive. So positive, partial positive charge. Delta means partial charge. And another HCl molecule will have same polarity. So negative will attract positive. But here, because it is dipole, permanent dipole, the force of attraction is much greater than the London forces or dispersion forces. First of all, these are permanent forces. Because these are permanent dipoles, it is not that we will remove something and this dipole will appear or disappear. This will not disappear. Then there is hydrogen bond, which is a special case of dipole-dipole. So similar to HCl, if we consider HF, then this force of attraction is very high. These are two molecules, but now the force of attraction is very high because the difference in electronegativity is very high. Chlorine is highly electronegative, and hydrogen is electropositive. But due to fluorine being highly electronegative, the force of attraction is considerably higher. It is so higher that it changes the physical properties of the molecule, and sometimes chemical also, because the bond is not broken. So that's why sometimes, or bond is sometimes broken easily. If we consider it ionic, then there will be change in chemical properties as well. So hydrogen bond is a special case of dipole-dipole force, in which case the force of attraction is considerably higher, which changes its properties. For example, the boiling point of water is much higher than what could have been from its theoretical value, and that is due to hydrogen bonding, 100 degrees Celsius. Other similar compounds, for example, HCl, will not have that much higher boiling point. It will boil at a lower temperature because there is less force of attraction. Hydrogen bond is formed only by nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine. Means if you consider the periodic table, in periodic table, these are towards the top right corner: fluorine, oxygen, nitrogen. After that, obviously, you have inert gases, noble gases. Those are not electronegative. Only by nitrogen, oxygen, and fluorine when they form bonds with hydrogen. Energy of hydrogen bond varies between 10 to 100 kilojoules. 10 kilojoule is not significant, but 100 kilojoule or say 70 kilojoule to 100 kilojoule is significant energy. And it actually changes the properties of the compounds. Next is dipole-induced dipole forces. Remember, we are talking about only types of van der Waals forces. Van der Waals forces, three types: London or dispersion forces, dipole-dipole, and dipole-induced forces. As the name suggests, one is dipole and it induces dipole, means creates dipole moment in other molecule. So operates between polar molecules having permanent dipole and the molecule which does not have dipole moment. Induced dipole moment depends upon the dipole moment present in the permanent dipole. So if the permanent dipole is stronger dipole moment, has a stronger dipole moment, the induced dipole will be stronger. So molecules of larger size can be easily polarized. And remember these facts, these are actually the answers. Objective questions appear from these facts. Molecules of larger size can be easily polarized, and this is something we have already talked about in 11th grade, that because larger size electron cloud is large, it can be disturbed easily. If it is small, for example, it is fluorine, very small, electron density is very high. It is similar to that you have a solid ball, a small ball which is solid, because electron density is high. Electron density is high in a smaller size. That's why we can consider it a solid ball or a sponge ball. Okay, ball. Now, larger one, here the electrons are distributed in very large area. It means low density. Low density means it can be pressed easily. So consider this is a ball and this is a balloon. Balloon can be pressed easily because the air inside it has less density, means less density of the electrons. So it can be pressed easily means can be polarized easily. Why? Because its electron cloud can be disturbed easily. So electron cloud will move to one side, left side, right side also, and that's why it will be polarized easily. So molecules of larger size can be easily polarized. And how it will look like? So this one is permanent dipole, this one is non-polar molecule. But when they come closer, due to this electronegative behavior, it will pull the positive part towards itself and it will gain partial positive charge. And on the other end, it will be partial negative charge. So dipole will be induced by a permanent dipole. That's why the name dipole induced dipole force. High polarizability increases the strength of the attractive interactions. So if it is a strong dipole, there will be greater force of attraction. The same thing we talked about earlier. Next, classification of molecular solids on the basis of the van der Waals forces we just talked about. So we talked about three types of van der Waals forces. On that basis, we have non-polar molecular solids. This one is although different from that one. Then polar molecular solids and then hydrogen bonded molecular solids. So non-polar molecular solids will be those ones where there is no polarity. For example, H2 molecule, hydrogen molecule, and both are HH. There is no difference in electronegativity. Those will be termed as non-polar. So one by one, non-polar molecular solids, those crystalline solids which comprise either noble gas atoms, for example, argon, helium. The, remember, we are not talking about gases. When these are solid in solid form, means temperature is so low that they solidify. Or non-polar molecules, for example, H2, Cl2, I2. Why? Because even though chlorine is electronegative, but between two chlorines, there is no change in electronegativity, no difference in electronegativity. So because you can't say this can be partially positive, this can be partially negative, or vice versa. So that's why these are non-polar molecular solids. Remember, we are talking about only solids. Students get confused that we are writing gases and terming that as solid. We are talking about low temperature when they are actually in solid state. Then CCl4, because carbon here, although there will be dipole moment, but net dipole moment will be zero. Net dipole moment will get cancelled out. So that's why we will say it is non-polar molecule. Similarly, CO2, net dipole moment will get cancelled out. In case of CCl4 also, all dipole moments at 109.5 degree, they will get cancelled out. Similarly, benzene, all dipole moments will get cancelled out. It is symmetrical. From any side you see, it will look same. Benzene. And remember, all are molecules. So if you see here, H2, Cl2, I2, this one, except the argons, because these actually do not form molecules. But then you can say, why do we term them as molecular solids? The reason is they are not ionic, they are not metals, and they do not have any covalent bonds amongst the atoms. So they cannot be metallic solids, they cannot be ionic solids, they cannot be covalent solids, they can be only molecular solids, where many argon atoms will combine with one another. So this will be similar to, if you remember, sulfur, I told you in 11, sulfur exists as S8 molecule, means 8 sulfur atoms are combined together and then they form S8. Similar thing happen in case of argon, helium, etc. Many atoms combined together in solid phase only, okay? And then these are termed as molecules. Examples are important. You will certainly get, if you get question from here, you will certainly get the question related to examples then. Molecules are held by London forces. Means there might be some disturbance in one. Initially they are balanced. There is some disturbance in one, and then the other one is also induced due to disturbance, vibration, etc. So non-polar molecular solids, as I said, based on the van der Waals forces, we will classify them in three. Non-polar molecular solids are based on London forces. London forces, one type of van der Waals force. These are soft non-conductors because these are not ionic. These are soft because very weak London forces. London forces are very weak. Have very low melting point. Obviously, if they are soft, very weak force, they will have low melting point. So these are interrelated. Are usually in liquid or gaseous state at room temperature. At room temperature, they are liquid and gases. They are not solids. And you can see all of these. None of these solid at room temperature. Then polar molecular solids. These are based on dipole-dipole moment. For example, we discussed HCl, then also SO2, urea. The examples are very important. So molecules are held by dipole-dipole force. So we discussed about this. This is another type of van der Waals force. Second type, based on that, it is polar molecular solids. These are again soft and non-conductors, but not as soft as non-polar molecular solids. Okay. Have low melting point, but higher than non-polar molecular solids. So NPMS, if you get this term, don't get confused. It is just non-polar molecular solids, NPMS. So their melting point, why it is higher than non-polar molecular solids? Because the dipole-dipole force is stronger than London force or dispersion force. That's why. So these are soft, but not as soft as non-polar molecular solids. Are usually in liquid gaseous state. These are also at room temperature and pressure. These are either liquid or gases. So you can see HCl, SO2 are normally. HCl is a gas. Okay, HCl normally when HCl is produced, it is gas. What you get in laboratory, that is actually a solution of that gas in water. SO2 is a gas. Okay, urea is solid. Hydrogen bonded molecular solids. We talked about hydrogen bond is a specific case of dipole-dipole moment. So hydrogen bonded molecular solids, where, for example, H2O, ammonia. H2O when we talk about obviously in solid phase, ice, or ammonia when it is in solid phase, because both have oxygen and ammonia has nitrogen. The strong hydrogen bonding binds molecules. So hydrogen bonding is stronger than dipole-dipole, normal dipole-dipole moment. Again, these are non-conductors in solid phase. Okay. Remember in solid phase, but don't try it with ice because ice anyway has some content of water at the surface due to room temperature. At room temperature, the surface has water. So in real terms, you won't have ice as non-conductor. Generally, volatile liquids or soft liquids under room temperature and pressure. For example, water is volatile. Then ionic solids. So we talked about three types of molecular solids: non-polar, polar, hydrogen bonded. Ionic solids, as the name suggests, crystalline solids comprised of ions, cations, and anions. So you can easily identify these: NaCl, LiF, MgO, ZnS, CF2, K2SO4, whatever which can get ionized will be termed as ionic solid. Make sure that you remember the examples. These are important. Okay. Shivangi, properties of polar molecular solids. Polar molecular solids properties are these. Anish, hydrogen bonded, these. Clear? These puzzles is strong. Just a second. Okay. These possess strong Coulombic forces, means electrostatic forces, because one is cation, the other one is anion. That's why. High melting point and boiling point. These characteristics are important because I'll just give you one question. On that basis, you will have to identify what type of solid it is. So if you don't know the properties, you won't be able to identify the solid. High melting point and boiling point. But remember, these will not be conductors in solid phase. Only in molten or in liquid phase, these will be when they are in electrolytic form or molten form, they will be conductors. In solid state, no. Otherwise, they are insulators, conductors in aqueous solution or molten state. Soluble in polar solvents. These properties you need to use if you are asked to identify the type of solid, crystalline solid. So memorize all these points because you will get another assignment tomorrow based on what we are doing today. Next, ionic solids are hard due to strong electrostatic forces. Electrostatic forces are actually forces between the ions. These are known as electrostatic forces. There is no bond. They are kept intact by the electrostatic forces. So there is no bond. These are just the forces. They are brittle as their stability depends on preservation of their geometry pattern. So if you see, if you want to understand it, it will be something like that. You have cation, cation, okay, and then another pair of cation, and then you have anions. Like this. Now, if you see, this is a specific arrangement, and this is in balanced condition. All the forces are balanced. But now suppose you hammer, okay, you hammer, then it disturbs the balance of the forces. It can bring negative closer to each other. The moment negative come closer to each other, positive come closer to each other, the structure will get disturbed, and due to force of repulsion, the crystal will break. So that's why these are brittle. Okay. So if we drop a crystal of salt, normal common salt, NaCl, okay, it breaks because it is brittle because the forces of attraction get disturbed and can be converted to forces of repulsion due to positive and negative coming closer. So their geometric pattern gets disturbed. Next, metallic solids, easiest one amongst all four. Crystalline solids comprised of positively charged metal ions, and positively charged metal ions are known as kernels. So if I say Mg2 plus, it is termed as kernel. And free electrons. So obviously it has lost the electrons, 2 electrons. So this is positively charged. It has lost the electrons, which are movable, moving. So crystalline solids comprised of positively charged metal ions and these free electrons, these are termed as metallic solids. So in simple terms, metals are metallic solids. Simple. All metals and alloys. So even if two metals are mixed, the characteristics are same. These will have kernels and electrons. That's why metallic solids. They possess high thermal and electrical conductivity. You know that all metals have good thermal and electrical conductivity. They possess luster and color. Most of the metals are colored except sodium, etc., which are very dull in color. They are highly malleable and ductile. Now the covalent or network solid. This is the one where students slightly initially are confused, but towards the end it is clear. Crystalline solids comprised of non-metal atoms linked by covalent bonds. If you remember these two conditions, you will not get confused. And I'll show you examples, quite a few examples, so that you are not confused. First of all, first condition, non-metal atoms linked by covalent bonds. And that will help you to identify whether it will be covalent or network solid or not. Covalent solid, network solid, same thing. Two terms for same thing. They are giant molecules, very big molecules. For example, diamond, graphite, silicon carbide, silicon dioxide, aluminum nitride. Now here, remember, when I'm talking about SiO2, I'm only talking about quartz because quartz is crystalline. Same formula, glass is not crystalline, and we are talking about crystalline solid. That's why I have written quartz here. Glass is not a covalent solid, crystalline covalent solid. Then aluminum nitride also. These are just few examples. We will talk about more examples here. Now you might get confused. That's what I said initially. You will get confused. Why you will get confused? Because till diamond it was fine, graphite it was fine, silicon it was fine, SiO2 it was fine. But here I have aluminum, and aluminum is a metal. So there are exceptions. Exceptions are in such a way that the networking will be with nitrogen. Main networking will be with nitrogen. That's why it is covalent solid. Because the covalent bond is being formed amongst nitrogens. Okay, so exceptions will be there, but once you memorize and understand the examples, it will be clear. So diamond, if you see, diamond structure is like this. All carbons are attached to other carbons in tetrahedral geometry. So if I see this one, if I consider this one as central atom, okay, then this is tetrahedral. All these four bonds are at 109.5 degree approximately. If I consider another one, let's say this one, then again 1, 2, 3, 4, all at 109.5 degree. So they will all be, although not shown, they will all be having tetrahedral geometry. Because here only a section is shown. So obviously those which are towards the end are not shown as tetrahedral, but all the atoms will be tetrahedrally bonded with one another. As covalent bonds are very strong and directional, means if it is tetrahedral, you know that the four bonds will be at 109 degree at in certain direction. Covalent solids are very hard and brittle. Again, because the structure is disturbed, they might break. So diamond is very hard, okay, but it is brittle. They have extremely high melting point. Covalent bonds are very strong. They have high melting point. Remember, we talked about the same thing in ionic solids also. So ionic solids are very hard brittle. Ionic solids have high melting point. So these characteristics are common. A few covalent solids can even decompose before melting. Means they have so high melting point that they get decomposed into their constituent atoms. Instead of melting, they get decomposed. So high melting point. These are insulators. Now exception. Exception is graphite. Graphite also has covalent bonds amongst the carbon atoms, but the exceptions are it is soft and a good conductor of electricity. Graphite is a covalent solid, diamond is a covalent solid, but exception is normally the covalent solids are very hard and insulators, but graphite is soft and good conductor of electricity. This is because carbon atoms are arranged in layers and one electron is unbonded. So these are arranged in layers. So if we see every atom is bonded to three atoms. One electron on the carbon is free. It is not bonded. So if it is not bonded, it is free to move. Graphite can conduct electricity. In each layer, each carbon atom linked to three neighboring carbon atoms, the fourth electron of each atom is free to move, hence good conductor of electricity. Distance between the layers is greater than CC bond length, hence soft and acts as a good solid lubricant because layers can slide one over the other. And layers are at a greater distance from one another as compared to the bond length. So I'm just going back to the diagram. If you consider this distance, so this is one layer, this is another layer. The distance between the layer is much greater than, it is much larger as compared to the bond length. Bond length is much shorter. So that's why these layers can slide one over the other, and graphite is used as solid lubricant as bush, for example, in fans, etc. Now the question. Classify the following solids in different categories based on the nature of intermolecular forces operating in them. Okay. Means molecular solid or ionic solid or metallic solid or covalent solid. Okay. And if it is possible within molecular solid, whether it is non-polar or polar or hydrogen bond. Yastika, which previous slide? Just this one? No. Now, these type of questions are very common, that identify which type of solid it is. Potassium sulfate. So if I talk about potassium sulfate, sulfate is an ion. Okay. So just how will you identify? This is not a metal. Okay. Potassium sulfate, this is ions. Okay. Very good answers. Quite a few answers. Okay. Shivangi, Mehak, Divya, Arohi, Rohina, Ashi, Shashwat, Anish, Rohina. Correct. Okay. So potassium sulfate is ionic solid. Sulfate is an ion. Okay. Now the second one, tin. Tin is a metal. Yes, Armina, correct. Ashi, okay, good. Arohi, Devya, Shashwat, Rita, Mehak, good. So it is metal, it has to be metallic solid. Then benzene. I gave you this example about benzene, so that's why I'm just skipping this one. This is molecular solid and it is non-polar because it will appear same from all the sides. All the dipole moments will get cancelled. So molecular and non-polar solid. Then urea. Urea was one of the examples, if you remember. Okay, so it is again a molecule, but it is polar molecule because it contains nitrogen. Nitrogen is highly electronegative. So that's why it is polar molecular solid. Urea, polar molecular solid. Next, water. Okay, hydrogen bonded molecular solid. In zinc sulfide. Now, zinc and sulfide, zinc is electropositive, sulfide is electronegative. Ions will be formed ionic solid. Next, graphite. It is actually covalent or network solid. Rubidium, you know that rubidium is a metal. Good. Argon, which type of solid it is? It is non-polar molecular solids. In this case, because molecular solids are divided in three, so here you have to mention molecular if you are mentioning polar, non-polar. Silicon carbide. Now, silicon and carbide, if we talk about Si, silica and carbide, both are close. They are same group. Okay, there is no difference, considerable difference in electronegativity. So these can't form ionic compound. Okay, yeah, they be correct. So it is covalent or network solid. Now some more solids and their types because these are asked in questions. So that's why ionic solids, for example, ammonium phosphate is ionic solid, lithium bromide is ionic solid, metallic, whether it is because I didn't include any alloys, so that's why alloys will be also metallic solids. Molecular solids, for example, tetraphosphorus dioxide. So it is actually P2O5, but P2O5 exists as P4O10, tetraphosphorus dicoxide. Then iodine, phosphorus, these are all molecular solids. And you need to remember these examples can be asked in your examination. Then covalent network, this is something we have talked about silicon carbide, graphite, then Si only. This is not a metal, and I can tell you that many a times students make a mistake here. They write it as metallic solid. It's not a metal. Plastic is obviously amorphous, so you don't need to mention it as molecular, ionic, metallic, or covalent solid. Remember. Now the question. Solid A is very hard electrical insulator in solid as well as in molten state. Hard electrical solid, electrical insulator in solid as well as molten state and melts at extremely high temperature. What type of solid it is? Mehak, Divya, correct. Sir, Rita, correct answer. Ashi correct, Tuhina correct, Armina correct. Shivangi, think again. Read the question. Sudipta correct. Sneha, no, what type of, so not the name, what type of? Uh, Yastika, no. Think again. Arohi correct. Shashwat, no. Panna correct. Anish, no. So honey correct. Remember, it is saying it is insulator in solid as well as molten state. So in molten state also it is insulator. Can it be ionic? Ionic compounds are electrical conductors in molten state or in aqueous state. So it has to be covalent because it matches all the characteristics of covalent. It is very hard. It is insulator in solid as well as molten and has very high, extremely high melting point. All characteristics are of covalent or network solid. Now, the only difference from ionic solids is that it is insulator in molten state. Otherwise, it could have been ionic solid as well. But due to this reason, it is not ionic solid. So it is covalent network solid. Examples are given here, but if the question is just what type of solid, you just need to mention covalent or network solid. If you are asked about the examples, then you can give these examples which you already know. Diamond, graphite, SiC, silicon carbide, silicon dioxide, all these. One major confusion students face, they think that if there are covalent bonds, it will be covalent solid. Covalent bonds are in many molecules. For example, H2O also has covalent bond, but H2O doesn't form covalent solid. And in NH3 also there are covalent bonds. So don't get confused that by covalent or network solid we are talking about covalent bonds. No. Okay. Molecular solids are those ones which are related to van der Waals forces. So if you can remember these points, you will be very easily able to find the type of solid, crystalline solid. Next question. Ionic solids conduct electricity in molten state but not in solid state. Explain why, the reason. Okay. Due to mobility. So in molten state, ionic solids dissociate to give free ions and hence conduct electricity. They can move, they can dissociate. Why they can dissociate? Because they can move in molten state. Yes, Ashi, correct. You can say that ions are not free to move in solid states. That's why they do not get dissociated into ions. Um, Thermal energy is not the concept here. In this case, we will say that due to, you can say due to thermal energy, okay, but it is given already in molten state. It means we have already provided energy. So we will consider it, it is already in molten state. Then ions can move. So that's why they can dissociate to give free ions, which can move and hence conduct electricity. So if there are ions and they can't move, even then they can't conduct electricity. So it is good that if you mention that they can move and hence conduct electricity. Next question. What type of solids are electrical conductors, malleable and ductile? Now this one is very easy. So I am skipping this one. Metallic solids are electrical conductors, malleable and ductile. Next question. How would you distinguish between a metallic solid and an ionic solid other than by metallic luster? Metallic luster is that you can say that we will distinguish, we will cut it, and metallic solid will give us luster, ionic solid will not. So you don't need to use that one. The question says other than metallic luster, how can you distinguish between a metallic solid and an ionic solid? And you know it, okay? Okay, Preeta, but you need to mention conditions also. Your answer is correct. Mehak, correct answer. Good. Yes, tell me. And I'm telling you, you all know the answer. Arohi, the concept is yes, correct. You need to use that concept, but you need to mention the conditions as well. Yes, Shivangi, correct answer. Divya got correct answer. Anish, answer is correct, but you need to tell me the conditions as well. Shashwat, yes, that can be the correct answer. I think that is something different, but correct. Okay. Mm, Preeta, you need to mention the conditions. Tuhina, yes, correct. Good. Okay. So the answer is metallic solids are conductor in all states. However, ionic solids are not conductors in solid state. They will be conductors only in molten or aqueous states. So that's how you can distinguish. In molten state, ionic solids will conduct electricity. In solid state, they will not conduct electricity. So ionic solids, they are poor conductor of electricity and therefore are insulators in solid state. Metallic solids, they are good conductors of electricity and heat in solid state. Now the one which Shashwat said, and that is different but correct. Okay, Shashwat said that ionic solids are soluble in polar solvents, and obviously metals won't be soluble. So that can be written, but your teachers will be looking for the answers which are common. So mention the conductivity, electrical conductivity in solid state and molten state. Next question. What type of interactions hold the molecules together in a polar molecular solid? You know molecular solids are non-polar, polar, hydrogen bonded. What type of interactions? Good, very good. Mehak, Preeta, Ashi, Shashwat, Shivangi, good. Tuhina, correct. Good. So many answers correct. So these are dipole-dipole interactions. Yes, Sudeepta, Armina, correct. Okay, be active on chat window, everyone. Okay, everyone has to be active. Anish, yes. Good. Dipole-dipole interactions. Okay, they are held together. Next question. Stability of a crystal is related to the magnitude of its melting point. How? Stability of a crystal is related to magnitude of its melting point. It is because if its melting point is low, it means it is less stable with just very small amount of thermal energy. So remember, this is comparison of intermolecular forces and thermal energy. So I'm just explaining it. Yeah, understand. Intermolecular forces and thermal energy. This is what we talked about earlier in previous class. These will hold the molecules together, these will repel. Now, if melting point is low, now I'm talking about melting point. If melting point is low, it means thermal energy, this force and thermal energy is already very high. Thermal energy is already high. That's why it required less heat. And that thermal energy became greater than the interactive intermolecular attraction attractive forces. These are attractive forces, and thermal energy became greater than attractive forces with very low amount of heat. If it requires very high amount of heat, it means thermal energy is very low as compared to force of attraction. That's why it is requiring very high amount of heat to reach or overcome the force of attractions. So if the question says stability of a crystal is related to magnitude of its melting point, you will say yes. If melting point is low, it means the crystal is less stable. If melting point is very high, the crystal is very stable. How you will write it? You will say melting point of a solid is related to the attractive forces or attraction forces between its molecules. Higher the melting point of a crystalline substance, greater are the forces between the constant particles, and hence greater is the stability. It requires higher heat because the molecules are attached with one another with greater force. So it is more stable. Yes, Divya Preeta Ashi. Yes, correct. That's the concept. I need everyone active. Okay. So memorize this statement, understand, and then memorize. Higher the melting point, greater the forces, greater the stability. Okay, Arohi, what I am saying that suppose there are these molecules, okay, and these have force of attraction, and that's why these are in solid phase because force of attraction is greater than thermal energy. So very high force of attraction. Suppose they have very high force of attraction. Okay, and say magnitude of this force of attraction is some say 20 units, and thermal energy say is 4 units. Now if you have to melt it, in that case melting means the you have to overcome the force of attraction. These molecules have to be apart from one another. It means you will have to increase this energy to 20 units. So higher the force of attraction, okay, means it is more stable. Higher the force of attraction means more stable. If it is more stable, we will require more energy to set the molecules apart from one another. But suppose there is another case where this force of attraction is just 5 units and the thermal energy is 4 units. Now it will require very less amount of heat to set the molecules apart, means converted from solid phase to liquid phase. It means in this case, the melting point will be low. In first case, melting point high. It means melting point high is related to more stable and melting point low is related to less stable. Less force of attraction, less stable. Is that clear now? So these are interrelated. Melting point and stability are interrelated. I would suggest that still you remember these points. Okay? Higher the melting point, greater force of attraction, greater the stability. So just remember greater. It's anyway greater. Higher also means greater. So higher the melting point, higher the force of attraction, higher the stability. And this is something you have to write as answer to this question. Next is crystal lattice and unit cells. Let me see the time, whether we will be able to finish. We have only 3 minutes. Okay, so I'm stopping it here. And there will be one assignment. I don't know whether it will be possible to have that assignment because I had planned to cover at least some part of unit cells. Do you have 20 minutes, everyone? Just confirm. Can we continue for 15 minutes or 20 minutes? Okay, so we will continue for just a small section. Okay, good, good, good. Okay, so we are continuing. Crystal lattices and unit cell. So all solids are actually repetitive structures of very small units. So that unit propagates in all directions, in 3D directions, and then we say it is a solid. So the smallest unit, which actually repeats in all directions, is known as unit. So the crystal lattice is just a regular repeating arrangement of some points in space. So if I say I have one cube, this is cube, and this cube repeats in all the directions. So there is another cube here. There is another cube in this side also. And then we have cube at the top side also. And bottom side also, left side also, in all, okay, back, forward, and then it will form a solid. So it's the same unit, similar type of unit, which actually repeat in all the directions, and then they form lattice. So the smallest part, which when repeated regularly in all directions, produces crystal lattice. And that smallest part is known as unit cell. So the heading, if you see, is crystal lattices and unit cells. It is actually that lattices are formed by unit cells. So the smallest unit which repeats itself is known as unit cell. Now, these can be two-dimensional and three-dimensional. However, in syllabus, we will be talking about only three-dimensional lattices. Two-dimensionals are just to elaborate the three-dimensional, because to reach three-dimensional lattices, you first need to understand two-dimensional, nothing else. Okay? So the smallest unit which I talked about, say it is just like a cube. So if it is just like a cube which repeats itself in all directions, so similar cube in left direction, right direction, and many such, okay, keep on repeating, they keep on repeating. Then unit cell is defined by 6 parameters, and those parameters are shown here. So these unit cells will have length of the edges A, B, C. So this is the form of cuboid basically here. So A, B, C are the length or edges. Then we have angles alpha, beta, gamma. Now remember, alpha is the angle opposite to A, means between B and C. Beta is angle opposite to B, and gamma is angle opposite to C, means between A and B. So you remember that which one is actually alpha, which one beta, which one gamma, because otherwise you will not be able to identify the Bravais lattices we will be talking about later, tomorrow. No, day after tomorrow. You need to be very clear which one is alpha, which one is beta, which one is gamma. And these are the parameters of unit cell. So if you are asked how many parameters are there to define unit cell, there are 6 parameters which define the unit cell. Out of those 6, 3 are the edges and 3 are the angles between those edges. Next, we talk about what type of cells can be there. So primitive one is the very basic one. Primitive itself means basic. So the one which I showed you here is actually the primitive unit cell. So when constituent particles are present only on the corner positions of a unit cell, it is called primitive unit cell. So you can see that we have particles or atoms or molecules. These can be anything, okay? These can be ions also. In a solid, if these are arranged in such a way that they form the corners of a cube, for example, then these are known as primitive unit cell. Primitive unit cell is that one in which the atoms, particles, or molecules are at the corners of the unit cell. Then centered unit cell. In centered unit cell, we have 3 types: body centered, face centered, and centered unit cells. And these are not difficult to understand. Apart from what we have in primitive unit cell, apart from means all these 3 will have this structure, primitive one. But besides these 8 corners, there will be other atoms also present. So for body, as the name suggests, the atom will be just at the center, inside body. Inside body, at the center. Remaining ones are at the corner. And this unit cell will repeat itself in all the directions: left, right, top, bottom, front, back. And then it will form a lattice, which will be known as body centered lattice. Okay, it is termed as BCC, body centered cubic lattice. So you might not get a name written as body centered. Most of the times you will be getting written as BCC. Yes, Devya. So it is, if you try to visualize it, it will be that you have a cube a cube, and there is one atom in the center. Inside cube at the center from all the sides. Okay. Rest of the atoms will be on the corners. Is that clear now? Okay. Okay. So body centered means there will be one extra particle, atom, molecule at the center. Next is face centered. Now, this one might be very difficult to understand, but it is actually very easy. When we say it is face centered, on every face, so you have a cube, again, but now apart from the corners, you have an atom on every face. For example, here at the top, on left side, at the bottom, on front side, on back side. Back side one, let me, okay, on every face. Okay, as I said, corners will have always. However, when we will be talking about voids, then some atoms might be missing. But for now, corners will be. So corners are the basic ones. It might be that one is missing in specific cases we will be talking about, but corners will be there. Apart from corners, there are six faces: left, right, top, bottom, front, back. Six faces. All six faces will have one atom, or it can be ion, or it can be molecule. Clear? Now, one thing I need to explain here before I move forward, because that will be used. When I talked about body centered, the entire atom which is inside the cell, that is part of that cell. That is not being shared by any other cell, the body one, center one only. But if you see face centered, there will be another repeating units here. And now if I see this one, this is on the face, it will be shared 50% by left side cell and 50% by right side cell. It will actually will look like, if these are, this is the front view, this will actually be like this. That is 50% in left side, 50% in right side. So the contribution of each atom which is on the face will be half in one unit cell. So if I just consider one unit cell, I have six atoms on the face. Those will effectively be 6 by 2, that is three atoms in one cell. Not all six, because half will be shared by other cells. Is that clear? But if I talk about body centered, the entire unit as that one atom. So that will be 100% contribution. The contribution will be 1 in that case. Now come to the corner ones. And this is slightly tricky to understand. What do you think? What is the contribution of the corner atom? Say I'm talking about this atom in one unit cell. By how many unit cells it is being shared, that will give you the answer. Shashwat, correct. Preeta, think again. You are close, but think again. No, okay. For that, I'll explain. But first, let me explain the end-centered as well. Now, end-centered is actually very similar to the one I have discussed. Here I discussed that it is on all faces. In end-centered, it will be on opposite faces. That is the only difference, only on opposite faces. It means if I talk about the end-centered, okay, remember we have talked about body-centered, we have talked about face-centered. Face-centered means on all faces. End-centered means, as the name suggests, end. Means if one is on the left face, the other one is on the right. Only two. Remember, all corners will have one atom. So that is the basic requirement. Apart from what what the unit has on the corners, apart from those, it will have two atoms on opposite faces, means opposite ends. That's why it is end-centered. Okay. And here again, this will have half contribution in the cell. Half will be on the right side. Whatever cell will be on the right side, that will be containing half of it. Similarly, half of it will be inside the cell on the left side, and half of will be whatever cell is on the left hand side of it. So total contribution of the yellow atoms which are on the faces, in this case, total contribution is 2 times half, that is 1. So when I talked about face-centered cubic, FCC, face-centered cubic means FCC, then all 6 faces had atoms. And I told you that contribution on one face is just half. So 6 divided by 2, 3. So total contribution of faces inside one unit cell was 3. So effectively, I would say that whatever atoms are on faces, one unit has 3 atoms, not 6 atoms, because only 50% is inside that cell. Here it will be only one, effectively one atom, because half of each is in the other cells. So this is end-centered. It can be on any ends. In this case, top, bottom. Opposite ends. So it can be front, back also. Left, right, front, back, but only two. So that's what I had to tell you. One more thing I'll explain, okay? The contribution, about contribution, because I think the assignment has those questions. About the contribution, I told you that the body centered will have one contribution, means entire one atom is inside it. But the contribution at the corners, you need to understand. If I draw just 4 cells, okay, 4 cells. and I'm just looking at the front view, okay, front view of 4 cells. And this corner is being shared by how many cells? You will say 4. It's wrong. If this is here and say it is like this, if I see from this side, okay, so I'm just showing you the left view. So left view will be like this one. And actually, if I consider this as a ball, this ball will be like this. So what you are seeing actually from the front, you think that whole ball is shared by these 4 units. It is actually will be shared by 8 units because you will have similar pattern here. So this is front view. This is left view. So one atom will be shared, or you can say one ball will be shared by 8 unit cells. Yes, correct, Preeta, Shashwat. It means the portion of one ball in 1 unit cell will be just 1 by 8. Part of one atom or particular ion in 1 unit cell will be just 1 by 8 because one ball which is at the corner is being shared by 8 unit cells. It means further, it means what is the total contribution of 8 balls at the corner? There are in 1 unit cell, there are 8 corners, if you remember. In 1 unit cells, there are 8 corners. And each corner has one ball. Mehak, Sneha, Ankur, switch on your videos. Contribution, if you see, so there are 8. I'm just erasing it. So contribution of 8 balls or atoms at corners will be equal to 8 multiplied by contribution by 1. It is 1 at. So whatever atoms we have at the corners, we have 8 atoms at the corner, but effectively this is only one atom in the unit cell because rest of the 7 by 8 part is in other unit cells, adjacent unit cells. Is that clear to everyone? Effectively, it is one atom if we consider all 8 atoms at the corner. Good, very good. So I'm just summarizing before I close. Contribution of atoms at corners is 8 into 1 by 8, that is effectively 1. In body, So if it is in body, 1. Now remember, for BCC, it will not be 1. It will be whatever are at the corner and whatever you have inside the body means total 1 plus 1, 2 atoms. So if it is only at corner, it is 1 atom. In body, contribution 1. Hence, in BCC, 1 plus 1, 2 atoms. This one from corners, this one from inside the body. Okay. Now, in at faces, contribution will be half atom. Each face. Okay. At each face, contribution is just half. Hence, in face centered cubic, I'm just writing FCC because this is how you will get again and again FCC. In FCC will be contribution from corners plus contribution from 6 faces. Contribution from corner, total 8 corners, contribution 1 plus from 6 faces, 6 divided by 2, 3. That is effectively 4 atoms. So at corner, contribution is total 1 atom, all 8 corners. In BCC, total 2 atoms, 1 atom effectively from corners, 1 inside. FCC, 4 atoms, 1 from corners, 3 from all 6 faces. Now the remaining one, BCC. Sorry, BCC we have done already, end centered. Okay. Now for end centered, end centered will have corners plus ends. From corners, it will be 1 and 2 ends actually. There are 2 ends. From 2 ends, it will be half from each, means 1. Effectively, 2 atoms. Now let me know, is that clear or not? 1 from corners and 1 from 2 faces. Total half plus half, 2 faces. Good. Good. Very good. Okay, I need answer from everyone. Correct. So that's it for today. And tomorrow, 10 o'clock, as usual, the assignment will get enabled and you need to submit by end of the day tomorrow.